Good evening, and welcome to Red's Classic Theater. 40 years ago, Vancouver was the neon capital of North America. Tonight, we'll revisit that era as we tour a dazzling exhibit, City Lights, Neon in Vancouver, at the Vancouver Museum in Vanier Park. Hi, everybody. I'm Red Robinson. If you're a longtime resident of Vancouver, you'll recognize some of the signs we're going to show you here tonight, and that's coming up in our next segment. And our movie this week is also a flashy big city story. It's the 1964 comedy Sex and the Single Girl, starring Tony Curtis and Natalie Wood, and featuring Henry Fonda and Lauren Bacall. The film's title was borrowed from a popular novel by Helen Gurley Brown. But beyond that, you'd be hard-pressed to tell that the movie was based on Brown's bestseller. We'll have more about Helen Gurley Brown later. Now, here's Act One of Sex and the Single Girl. This week on Red's Classic Theater, we're visiting a very bright exhibit at the Vancouver Museum. City Lights, Neon in Vancouver is a celebration of an era when Vancouver was ahead of even New York in the number of neon signs hanging in the city. Among the gems in the museum's exhibit is this sign from the Smilin' Buddha Cabaret. It was rescued from a scrap heap by the rock band 5440, which used it on their concert tours. At 6 feet high and 15 feet long, the Owl Drugs We Deliver sign is another neon favorite. And even bigger is this Regents Taylor's sign with its Vegas-style flashing arrow. At the other end of the size scale are these fragile dogwood flowers, which form part of the sign for the old Silver Grill Cafe. We'll have more from the City Lights Neon in Vancouver exhibit when Red's Classic Theater returns to the Vancouver Museum in a moment. In addition to seeing some great neon art, the Vancouver Museum's City Lights exhibit also includes some historical background on Vancouver's neon craze. You'll learn how neon went from civic beautifier to civic eyesore in a matter of just a few years. And you'll learn how these particular signs were preserved to brighten our lives again today. City Lights Neon in Vancouver continues through until next April here at the Vancouver Museum. Now, you must come down and see it for yourself. It's an enlightening experience. Sorry about that. Now back to Sex and the Single Girl. Hope you're enjoying Sex and the Single Girl this week on Red's Classic Theater. The producers of tonight's movie very much wanted Henry Fonda to appear in their film, but he kept turning down their repeated requests. When Fonda learned that Lauren Bacall had agreed to appear, he became mildly interested. When Joseph Heller, author of Catch-22, was signed to write the screenplay, he became more interested. But what finally pushed Henry Fonda to sign on the dotted line was his desire to do more stage plays. Now, to do more stage plays, he had to appear in more films so that his name would be in front of the public. Now, he thought tonight's film would accomplish that. But when he and Lauren Bacall saw the reviews for tonight's film, both were livid. We'll have more about that in our next segment. Now let's return to Sex and the Single Girl. We're visiting the Vancouver Museum's City Lights Neon in Vancouver exhibit this week on Red's Classic Theater. When Lauren Bacall saw the final cut of tonight's film, she was furious. When she'd signed to appear in Sex and the Single Girl, it was her understanding that she'd have a substantial role, and what she saw on the screen was nothing more or less than a supporting role. If the final cut of the film upset Lauren Bacall, the reviews that followed really sent her over the top. One New York Times article referred to Henry Fonda, Lauren Bacall, and Mel Ferrar as the three old-timers who stole the show, and 3 cheers for the old folks at home. And to make matters worse, Tony Curtis fanned the flames by saying, "I think Lauren Bacall is 41 or even better. Now, how long does she think she can go on playing a 41-year-old teenager?" All in all, not a very pleasant experience for Lauren Bacall. Now let's return to Sex and the Single Girl. We're featuring Sex and the Single Girl this week on Red's Classic Theater. Tonight's movie is loosely based on the 1962 novel by Helen Gurley Brown. Born in Little Rock, Arkansas, Brown began her working career as a secretary in Los Angeles. After a series of jobs and a stint as a copywriter, her husband, movie producer David Brown, urged her to write a book. And that book became Sex and the Single Girl, an international bestseller. 3 years later, she was offered the chance to become editor of Cosmopolitan, a small magazine with little hope for success. But Brown turned that dud into a hit with good writing, sharp editing, and by always pushing the envelope. Today, Cosmopolitan prints 33 overseas editions every month, and that's a yearly profit of $50 million. Now back to Sex and the Single Girl. From the Vancouver Museum and their City Lights exhibit, time to test your knowledge of movie trivia with our weekly quiz. 4 years after appearing together in tonight's film, Henry Fonda and Tony Curtis appeared in another film, this time with more serious subject matter. Can you name that 1968 movie? We'll be back with the answer in just a moment. Time now to see if your answer to this week's movie trivia quiz is correct. 4 years after Sex and the Single Girl, Henry Fonda and Tony Curtis appeared in the 1968 movie The Boston Strangler. Now let's return to Henry Fonda and Tony Curtis in Sex and the Single Girl. Next Sunday night on Red's Classic Theater, we turn our attention to World War II. Robert Ryan and Robert Shaw lead an all-star cast in the spectacular 1965 war drama, Battle of the Bulge. That's our movie next week on Red's Classic Theater. And that's all the time we have for tonight's show. Hope you enjoyed Sex and the Single Girl. We'd like to thank the staff at the Vancouver Museum for hosting our show. And their exhibit, City Lights, Neon in Vancouver, continues through next April. If you'd like more information, call TV 12 tomorrow morning and we'll give you a phone number. I'll see you tomorrow morning on 650 CI with the Wake Up Club, and next week here on Red's Classic Theater. From Vanier Park and the Vancouver Museum, thanks for being with us, and good night, everybody. Sex and the Single Girl on Red's Classic Theater will continue. Red's Classic Theater from the City Lights exhibit at the Vancouver Museum will continue. Red's Classic Theater from the City Lights exhibit at the Vancouver Museum will continue. We're lighting up the night this week on Red's Classic Theater. Vancouver's dazzling past has come alive in City Lights, Neon in Vancouver, an exhibition now on display at the Vancouver Museum. Our movie this week is the 1965 comedy Sex and the Single Girl, and we'll tell you how Henry Fonda was persuaded to appear in the film and why Lauren Bacall was livid about the reviews. I'm Red Robinson. Join me, won't you?
Sunday night at 10 on TV 12.
We're lighting up the night this week on Red's Classic Theater. Vancouver's dazzling past has come alive in City Lights, Neon in Vancouver, an exhibition now on display at the Vancouver Museum. Our movie this week is the 1965 comedy Sex and the Single Girl, and we'll tell you how Henry Fonda was persuaded to appear in the film and why Lauren Bacall was livid about the reviews. I'm Red Robinson. Join me, won't you?
Tonight at 10 on TV 12.
This week on Red's Classic Theater, Tony Curtis has the hots for Natalie Wood in Sex and the Single Girl. Sunday night at 10 here on TV 12. Tonight on Red's Classic Theater, Tony Curtis has the hots for Natalie Wood in Sex and the Single Girl. Tonight at 10 here on TV 12. Sex and the Single Girl on Red's Classic Theater, Sunday night at 10. Sex and the Single Girl on Red's Classic Theater tonight at 10.